Lines and numbers on a road, there are many markings on a runway. And these markings each have their own meanings and rules. From now on, let's see what they mean by drawing the markings on a runway surface together. The runway is divided into 3 types: visual runways, non-precision instrument runways, and precision instrument runways. According to the aircraft's approach method, and markings are different depending on the type of runway.
The visual runway is a runway designed to use visual approach procedure for aircraft. Suppose there is a runway here, and its number is 36. The marking of this number is white. This is runway designation. The diminutions of the runway designation number should be 60 feet tall and 20 feet wide. The runway designation refers to the direction of the runway based on the magnetic north, which is the compass heading when the aircraft lands and departs on the runway. Divide 360 degrees by 10 degrees and round the number below the decimal point to represent as an integer. If the runway direction is 185 degrees, both 18 and 19 can be used. This number is based on the field of view when attempting an approach. Therefore, the other side is marked like this. The difference between the numbers at each end of the runway is always 18. This is because the angle between the two numbers is 180 degrees. If the runway is located at 0-90 degrees, airports that follow the FAA rule erase the leading zeros and use only the number 9. But many other airports also mark it as 09. If there are 2 parallel runways, they are identified by adding the letter of left and right at the below the runway number. If there are 3 parallel runways, the letter of center is added. In an airport with 4 parallel runways, the 2 runways are numbered differently to avoid confusion. For example, if the magnetic north of this 4 runways is 324 degrees, the runway number is determined like this. The runway centerline markings are white and are located along the center line of the runway between the runway designation markings. These markings consist of a line of uniformly spaced stripes and gaps. The stripes are 120 feet long and have gaps that are 80 feet in length. The minimum width of each stripe is 12 inches for visual approach runways. Centerline markings on runways identify the physical center of the runway and provides alignment guidance during landing and takeoff. Due to the different widths of runways, centerline marking is considered a prerequisite for takeoff and landing. This is the typical type of visual runway. Non-precision instrument runway is a runway having an existing instrument approach procedure utilizing air navigation facilities with only horizontal guidance. The non-precision runway has several additions from the basic form of the visual runway. First, the minimum width of each centerline stripe is 18 inches. Second, threshold marking is added. A threshold marking identifies the beginning of the runway that is available and suitable for landing. These markings start 20 feet from the runway threshold. The runway threshold markings consist of several white longitudinal stripes of uniform dimension arranged evenly about the runway centerline. The stripes must be 150 feet long, 5.75 feet wide, and spaced 5.75 feet apart except the center space, which is 11.5 feet apart. For the threshold markings, the number of stripes varies depending on the width of the runway. Threshold marking is used even in the case of a visual runway, when it meets the conditions of serving approach categories Charlie and Delta airplanes, or intended to be used by international commercial air transport. Third, aiming point marking is added. The aiming point marking serves as a visual aiming point for a landing aircraft. The aiming points are white, and the beginning of these markings are located 1,020 feet from the threshold. The aiming points consist of 2 rectangular markings, 150 feet in length, located on each side of the runway centerline. The width of each marking is 30 feet, and spacing between the inner sides of the markings is 72 feet for a runway with a width of 150 feet or greater. For runways that are less than 150 feet wide, the width of the markings and the space between the inner sides of the markings is decreased in proportion to the decrease in the width of the runway. Precision instrument runway means a runway having an existing instrument approach procedure utilizing an ILS or PAR and so on. The precision instrument runway has several additions from the basic form of the non-precision instrument runway. First, the minimum width of each centerline stripe is 36 inches. Second, a touchdown zone marking is added. The touchdown zone markings identify the touchdown zone area for landings. These markings are white and consist of groups of 1, 2, and 3 rectangular bars evenly arranged in pairs along the runway center line. For runway widths of 150 feet or greater, each rectangular bar is 75 feet long and 6 feet wide. As the runway gets shorter, the number of stripes on the inside of the runway decreases. Third, a runway edge marking is added. Runway edge markings provide a visual distinction between the runway and the surrounding terrain, and also outline the runway width. Runway edge markings are white and consist of continuous stripes located along each side of the runway. The stripes have a minimum width of 36 inches for runways of 100 feet or wider in width. So far, we have looked at the basic forms of marking for each runway type. And there is one more marking you need to know. You will be very familiar with displaced threshold. This means that the starting point of the runway is pushed further toward the direction where the aircraft is heading. It is mainly used for runway repair work, when landing at this point is impossible due to nearby mountains or obstacles, or when there is a noise problem. Displacement of a threshold reduces the length of runway available for landings. The portion of runway behind a displaced threshold is available for takeoffs in either direction and landings from the opposite direction. A threshold bar delineates the beginning of the runway that is available for landing when the threshold has been displaced. A threshold bar is 10 feet in width and extends across the width of the runway. White arrowheads with and without arrow shafts are required to identify the portion of the runway before the displaced threshold to provide centerline guidance for pilots during approaches, takeoffs, and landing rollouts from the opposite direction. V-shaped markings can be seen on both ends of the runway, indicating the blast pad, stopway, and EMAs. This area is intended to reduce the erosive effect of jet blast and propeller wash to support the airplane during an aborted takeoff. A series of identically shaped yellow chevrons are marked to indicate that takeoff and landing are not possible in this area. To identify pavement areas contiguous to the runway sides that are not intended for use by aircraft, yellow runway shoulder stripes may be used. The runway shoulder is optional, so it is not displayed at most airports. Let's look at the runway markings when there are two runways and they intersect each other. In these cases, the runways with the priority presented here are fully displayed through the intersection, while the surface markings of the other runway are completely interrupted. Also, among precision runways, priority is determined according to the category of each runway. In addition, methods such as displace of markings of interrupted runways and thresholds have been used to prevent confusion and ensure safety for pilots.
By referring to the various markings of the runways described above, the pilot makes it safe to land and depart. Those of you who have seen this video will be sure of the pilot's runway perception. In order to provide better service, it is a better way than anything else to try to be in the other person's position. We firmly believe that this video will enhance the quality of the air traffic control service